Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ASPRS ECPC Mentors podcast. I'm Greg Stamnes, chair of the ASPRS Early Career Professionals Council. And we also have with us here Jordan Hicks, vice chair of the ECPC. Jordan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jordan Hicks, vice chair of the ECPC, and really glad to be here today. Thanks.
Thanks, Jordan. So today's our special certification edition of the Mentors podcast. And yeah, we're going to cover all things certification. We have with us today Mike Zoltek and Danielle Blanchard from ASPRS. And Mike, you can take it from here, I think.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Mike Zoltek. I am the chair of the ASPRS Certification Committee, and I work very closely with Danielle Blanchard, who is also on the line. She works at the main office of ASPRS. So Greg provided me a couple of questions to start off, so I'll answer those questions before I go through my presentation. One of the first questions Greg asked me was, can I provide a brief overview of ASPRS and a role of the certification committee? And absolutely. ASPRS was founded in 1934 as the American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, ASPRS. And we are a scientific association that serves thousands of professional members around the world. And it's our mission to advance knowledge and improve the understanding of mapping sciences to promote the responsible applications of photogrammetry, remote sensing, GIS, and supporting technologies. ASPRS is divided into 7 major divisions focusing on relevant technical areas, those being our GIS division, LiDAR division, photogrammetric applications division, primary data acquisition division, our professional practice division. We have a remote sensing applications division and a UAS division. We also have 5 councils that include our early career professionals councils, our region officer council, our student advisory council. We have a sustaining members council, a technical division council, and a committee chairs council. And finally, ASPRS has 7 standing committees. Those include our awards committee, which gives out lots of awards each year and lots of scholarships. So if you don't know about that, please look into that. Our communication and publications committee, which puts out our PE and RS magazine. We have a data preservation and archiving committee, an education and professional development committee, a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, a standards committee, which just published addendum 2 of our 2023 ASPRS standards for geospatial data, and finally the evaluation for certification committee, of which I am the chair. So that's the large umbrella of what ASPRS is. Second question I got was, what motivated the establishment of the certification program and how has it evolved over the years? It was started in 1975 to recognize professionals with the experience and skills to perform geospatial mapping work. The program was begun with the Certified Photogrammetrist certification, which was our first scientist level certification. We'll go more into what that is later, and has been expanded to include 4 other scientist level certifications, those being in remote sensing, GIS, LiDAR, and UAS, as well as adding recently in the last few years, a technologist level certification for each category. Another question was, how are the examinations developed? Our exams are developed through a process that includes preparation of a body of knowledge and preparation of exam questions by volunteers, and a review process by practicing professionals with a goal of identifying and testing candidates on those topics that the practicing professionals believe are relevant and necessary to provide the highest level of service to clients in the geospatial community. Another question, easy one that I got, was, are the tests getting harder? I don't believe that the tests themselves are getting harder, but with the increasing use of technology and computers to do some of the core calculations, I do think that some of the more core concepts can be a little bit more difficult for candidates to learn on-the-job training. For example, if you're using a automated aerial triangulation program or one of these Pix4D programs where they do a lot of the work for you, you don't necessarily have to know what they're doing to get the right answer. But at ASPRS, we believe the concepts are just as important, and it's basically just a lot harder to get some of that on-the-job training for those core concepts because you're not doing as much as you used to do 30 years ago, and it was a much more analog process. People often ask, why would I get certified, and how does the certification benefit professionals? Our certifications are an objective evaluation of a person's experience, knowledge, and competencies. And completion of our program in a specialty area is recognized around the world as a demonstration of a mastery of those skills required to perform said geospatial service or services. We do offer multiple certifications, and there are some advantages to holding those because each designation carries with it a demonstration of competency in that particular specialty area. And the last question that I'll hit before I go into my presentation is, are there jurisdictions or states that require certification? There are no jurisdictions or states that require a certification, but there are many municipal, state, and federal government agencies that require various certifications to demonstrate competency and pursue contracts with said agencies. One example is here in the state of Florida, where I am. If you want to do photogrammetric work for the Florida Department of Transportation, they require that you have an ASPRS certified photogrammetrist on staff to review, to go over planning and review final products. So if you don't have an ASPRS CP on your staff, you can't go after that contract. Another example would be the Texas Department of Transportation. If you want to do LiDAR work and become a pre-qualified consultant for the Texas Department of Transportation, you're required to have a certified mapping scientist LiDAR on your staff. So there's a few ways that things happen. And there's even more in the federal government that require certain certifications of staff for your company to offer services under those particular contracts. So we've hit a few questions. So now what I'm going to do is jump through my presentation. As I said, you can see from the cover, I'm Mike Zoltek and Danielle Blanchard's on the line. If there is an administrative problem that I can't answer, I will be asking Danielle if she can help. Go to the next slide. Here's a little agenda of what we'll talk about. We'll go do just a little bit of a history of the ASPRS certification program, talk about certification versus licensure, our objectives, what's the difference between the scientist and technologist level certification I mentioned earlier. We'll go over all the certifications that we offer. We'll talk about the application process, our guidelines document, some of the things that happen behind the scenes. We'll talk about how if you apply, you can track your progress in a tracking tool. And we'll talk about some 2023 exam statistics, and then we'll answer any questions that still may be around. So I mentioned in 1975 was when we started our first certification, and that was the ASPRS Certified Photogrammetrist certification. At that time, it was a peer review and experience evaluation process. When it first started, we did not have an exam. As time went on in the 80s, we did begin preparation of an exam for certified photogrammetrist. And then in the early 90s, we approved a mapping scientist in remote sensing and GIS certification. And in 1998, we approved examinations for all of the certification levels. Another big component was in January 2013, where we received accreditation from the CESB. And in 2015, we added our LiDAR certifications. And I believe it was 2016, we added our UAS certification. So what is this difference? I said certification versus licensure. What's the difference? Well, a certification is typically a voluntary process, although a certification can be mandatory or required to practice. I mentioned that if you want to work for the Florida Department of Transportation or Texas Department of Transportation, they do require our certification versus a license. And it's typically provided by a private organization such as ASPRS for the purpose of providing the public protection on those individuals who have successfully met all the requirements for the credential and demonstrated their ability to perform their profession competently. Basically, it represents the achievement of a level of professional competency agreed to by an international community as qualified to practice profession. Basically, we are an objective evaluator of an individual's capabilities. And in some states, they want you to hold certain certifications to help you obtain a license. So what is a license? A license is a state's grant of legal authority to practice a profession within a designated scope of practice. You can get a license to practice medicine. You can get a license to practice law, surveying, engineering, architecture, many of these things. It is required in order to practice or to call oneself a licensed professional. Some states have a single license and some have a tiered system. And the names of licenses as well as requirements do vary from state to state. So I'm a licensed surveyor in 26 states, but that also means I'm not a licensed surveyor in 24 states. Although I have a certification as an ASPRS certified photogrammetrist, which all states recognize. So typically a license is a state by state situation. It can also be thought of as a mandatory certification. Under a licensing system, states typically define by statutes what functions are required to practice legally. As I said, you can't practice engineering without being a licensed engineer. You can't practice medicine without being a licensed doctor. So our objectives, what are the objectives of our program? They are to identify and recognize those persons who, after a careful appraisal by their peers and after passing a written examination, are considered to have met the requirements established by the Society for Certification. One of the things to take note of here is this is not just an exam. You have to pass a peer review where your education, your experience, and your qualifications are reviewed by a committee of like practicing professionals. In other words, if you want to get our LiDAR certification, we have a 3-member committee that reviews the application and all the additional information that goes with that. And only once you pass the committee's review and get a committee recommendation, are you able to take the examination. The other objective is to provide a basis for weighing the validity of allegations and complaints that involve practicing photogrammetrists and mapping scientists and taking appropriate action. We do have a governance committee at ASPRS. They review ethical complaints, they review other complaints, maybe they're technical, from potential clients, etc. Another objective of our program is to encourage people who are not yet fully qualified to work towards certification as a goal for professional achievement. And finally, to encourage certified professionals through the recertification process to continue their achievement as technology changes. We do have, as part of our program, a continuing education requirement to renew your certification. This program is voluntary and is open to anyone who's qualified. You do not have to be a member of ASPRS to apply for one of our credentials. The program is applicable to persons associated with one or more of our functional areas, the photogrammetry or the mapping sciences. The mapping sciences being, as I mentioned, GIS, LiDAR, UAS, and remote sensing on top of this photogrammetric area. And you may work at a professional or technical level in one of those areas, which is why we now have 2 different categories, as I mentioned, scientists and technologists. Let's see here. So what is the scientist level certification? Scientist level certifications, which include the certified photogrammetrist, are appropriate for applicants whose work involves the exercise of professional judgment, frequently based on the knowledge acquired through higher learning, generally of a non-routine character. The term implies one who has a broad knowledge of the geospatial sciences to a degree which supports the review and analysis of work being done, as well as a thorough understanding of the underlying theories, principles, and systems supporting the work being performed. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think the tests are getting harder. I think that getting experiences in the fundamentals is getting a little bit more difficult as the computers do more and more work for us. That's just my personal observation. Additionally, said individual has the knowledge and ability to both plan and perform and or direct all such operations in the category, and this person would be responsible for work performed by those under them. The review committee looks for a broad industry exposure external to the employment realm that gives validation and credibility to the activity, skills, knowledge, and mastery of the specific certification category being pursued. What does that mean? It's a lot of words. What it really means is if you are a person who has done the same task for X number of years, let's say you could be an aerial triangulation expert, you can be a UAS expert, etc. If you apply for one of our examinations and the extent of your experience is limited to a work environment and does not include being part of a professional organization, having higher education, college level courses in a particular area, things like that. Speaking at conferences, doesn't have to be an ASPRS conference, mind you, but being out there in the broad and having broad industry exposure, if you don't have those additional things, we typically recommend someone for a technologist level exam. Final sentence, this is usually categorized by a combination of higher education, outside teaching, publication, or independent industry engagement related to the specific certification being pursued. So that's our scientist certification requirements. Here are the focus areas of our scientist level exams. Of interest and of note, I think you should all take a look that many of these examinations, for example, photogrammetry, there's about, if you're going for a certified photogrammetrist, only about 40 to 45% of your exam is going to be on pure photogrammetry questions. The rest of your examinations are going to cover this broad industry exposure that we expect to have some understanding of remote sensing, LiDAR, UAS, etc. So again, our scientist level certifications are very broad-based. We're expecting that broad industry engagement, and we're expecting a broad area of knowledge. When we get to the technologist level certification, you'll see how those numbers change. They're much more focused. So going into the technologist level, they're appropriate for all applicants whose work is primarily routine and of a technical nature, yet demanding a high degree of skill. Such work is pre-professional when performed by a professional trainee who, having completed courses in specialized instruction and study, is seeking to attain a professional status. And such work can be professional when the applicant has advanced to a position of leadership in the performance of production-related tasks, to include the supervision of others. It implies that the applicant can perform all such operations, technical operations in the category, and this person may be responsible for work performed under him or her. This last note we added, honestly, after some conversations with Texas, regarding those applicants who have already retained other credentials, such as you're a licensed land surveyor, you're a licensed engineer, either certification is suitable to demonstrate the skills required to perform the tasks in the specialty area. For example, Texas DOT requires a CMS LiDAR for their pre-qualification. When they did that, we reached out to them and said, if you are also a licensed land surveyor engineer, we believe that our technologist level certification demonstrates the skills required to perform those tasks, and we asked them to change their rules. Now, as we get into the technologist level certification, I think you'll see, if we just go to photogrammetry right here, 70% of the questions roughly will be on photogrammetry. And you can see that we try not to have any remote sensing, GIS, or any of these other specialty areas as part of that examination, because you're focusing on a technologist who's focusing solely on that subject matter area. So that's a little bit more explanation on the breakdown. So I mentioned earlier, we have 5 categories: photogrammetry, remote sensing, GIS, LiDAR, and UAS. You will notice that we call it CMS remote sensing, CMS GIS, CMS LiDAR, and CMS UAS, yet we call photogrammetry just the CP. Why do we do that? Because it's been around since 1975 and people know what a CP is. And we didn't want to confuse that by calling it a CMS and photogrammetry. People would, we talked about it and we thought people would go, what happened to your photogrammetrist certification? These do attest to your ability, experience, and understanding in specified geospatial disciplines. They do not replace or supplant licensure, and we do have accreditations by CESB. How does this work? All the applications are now online. That's been a big transition over the last 3 or 4 years. So this is another reason Danielle is on the phone, because when you do put your application in, it goes straight to her so she can disseminate it to the appropriate review committee. So the application is received by headquarters, that is Danielle. It's reviewed for completion by headquarters staff, again, that's Danielle. We do request your references for you when you fill out your application. We simply look for names and emails so that we can objectively go get those references and get them back in. And when the application is complete, it is sent to the specialty area committee chair and the members for review. Those chairs summarize the reviews by each member and sends it back to headquarters, and the applicant is notified whether they pass committee review. And there's a couple things that can happen. You can either pass committee review and move forward. You can get a recommendation from the committee for potentially not being a scientist level and downgrade to a technologist level if your experience does not appear to warrant the scientist level, or it can be rejected. But the applicant is notified if they are accepted and requested to schedule an examination with our computer-based testing provider, which is Prometric, and the examination is graded immediately online, and the applicant is notified, as well as ASPRS staff are notified by email as to the score received. Again, you submit an application form with a fee. Right now, for members, it's $300 for a scientist level exam and $475 for non-members. For technologist level, it's $200 and $375. As far as that review process goes, it is a multi-member volunteer committee that reviews all the applications, typically a 3-person committee, and recommends for the exam if they meet the experience requirements, the requirements for activity and service to the profession, skills, length of time, length of responsibility. When I say that, for our scientist level exam, you're required to have at least 6 years of experience. And for our technologist level exam, at least 3 years of experience. We do require references. They do not have to be ASPRS certified individuals, but they should be people familiar with the work. And then the candidate is approved for the exam. It's typically how that happens. We do partner with Prometric. It was a great partnership. It means I don't have to hand grade paper exams anymore, so that was wonderful. It allows the exams. We did this right before COVID, so it worked out really well because you could have your exam in a COVID-safe environment. You get immediate test results, and it does allow for remote proctoring if you don't have a Prometric testing center near you. But I would tell everybody going to the Prometric testing center is your best option if it is available. Because it is a very rigorous routine to get your testing space. For example, if I was testing here where I'm sitting in my office, they would have to pan my camera around, see what I have in my office. If somebody walked in and said, "Hey, Mike," I'd probably get kicked out of the exam because they would assume that somebody's coming in there giving me answers. So I will say, if you can, please go to a testing center. One of the biggest reasons we offer the remote proctoring is this has finally allowed us to offer international testing, because we did have a policy of not mailing our paper exams around the world before this happened. Testing with Prometric, I just mentioned this. You can read this later. We strongly recommend you take it at an exam facility. And if you do take it at home, please read all of the instructions that are provided by Prometric, because they tell you what has to be your environment, I have a bookshelf over to my left. I would need to either take that bookshelf out or cover it with a sheet. I would have to have windows that close. There's lots of different things that they require. And it does seem extremely stringent, but I can tell you that post-COVID, when all the college kids were testing at home, they really learned how to game the system. So they are just very rigorous, and the slightest thing can get you kicked out of an exam. So be very careful if you want to go that route. What happens if you don't pass the exam? Well, if you don't pass it on the first attempt, you can retest within 6 months for no additional fee. If you need an extension past that 6 months to study more, to take a course, all you have to do is reach out to us, email applications@asprs.com or certification@asprs.com. That both goes to myself and Danielle, and we can give you an extension. We just have to have a rule that has a time limit on it. Certification is not for life. This is very big. It used to be when we first started, but upon our accreditation and trying to keep up with standard licensing regulations around the state and around different states, most of them require some sort of continuing education and require some sort of recertification process. So certified mapping scientist, which includes CP, every 5 years, you have to go through a recertification process, and certified technologists get renewed every 3 years. Typically, it involves a fee, updating your references, and providing continuing education and professional experience data so we can ensure you've met the continuing education requirements and you're still working in the industry. Online application is really easy to find. If you go to the ASPRS.org certification webpage, I should have put a little circle around that one. You click here to apply or recertify, and it takes you right into our form where you fill it out online. And at the very bottom, you hit submit now, and it sends the PDF form straight to Danielle for her to start the review process. Guidelines documents on the website under certification page. There is a certification guidelines document. Highly recommend that if you are going to apply, before you apply, download that document and read every page. Here's what this document looks like. It is approximately 27 pages long. What we tried to do here was answer every question that you might have. And hopefully that really helps speed up your application process. Behind the scenes, we have checklists. Did we fill out a spreadsheet? Did we update your IMAS account? A lot of this is Greek to you guys, but we make sure we send an invoice to the applicant. We have reference forms. This is the stuff that happens behind the scenes so we can keep track of what's going on for certification and recertification. If you do not pass review, we typically would let you know what the review comments were. For example, I believe Mr. I don't know why it keeps advancing automatically. I believe Mr. X application falls short of qualifying for the professional level certification in LiDAR because of a lack of involvement and contribution in the industry through publications engagement. We recommend he should go for a CMT. These are the types of things we look at. Real-time application status. This is a screenshot of my ASPRS profile. If I go into my profile and hit my certifications, I can see going all the way back to my very first certification, which was 2011. I applied, when it was sent to committee, when references are received. You can also see if a reference is missing. You can follow up that with that person. We try to follow up on approximately a monthly basis to make sure people respond. One of the biggest holdups, I will tell everybody, to getting your application through is you're missing a reference. So if you ask 4 of your coworkers to send in references, we'll check approximately once a month. But if you see that they're missing, absolutely feel free to give them a call and say, hey, Mike, you said you'd be my reference. Could you please send that in? My application is waiting on you. And until you have your references, it will not go to committee. We have a wonderful search page that we recently updated that if you search someone, and I use Rebecca Morton, because she's actually the one who really got me involved in ASPRS. And you can see she's been involved for a very long time. She has multiple certifications. You can see when her first certification was and the subsequent ones, so you can see if people are active. There are some government agencies that use this to make sure that when you put on a contract, proposal, RFP, etc., that you're certified, they'll come and look and make sure that you still have a certification. Going back to exams, these were the exam statistics up through 2023, including the end of year 2023. You can see we're running, and this is only since we went computer-based testing. It was very hard to do the math for these prior to that. The CP exam, sorry, keeps passing me forward. CP exam over time has about a 23% pass rate, but last year it was a 28% pass rate. You can see what the pass rates are. I will say it's a hard exam. You're not seeing anything really easy here. I guess the easiest exams are the LiDAR exam and the GIS exam have a higher pass rate over time. And again, I apologize for my screen moving on its own. You can kind of see what's going on. So with that, that's the overall review of the program. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
I've got a whole bunch.
I believe it.
Some of them are probably like more on the personal level, I guess, if you could add that little flair to it. And then again, Mike mentioned the guide. I think a lot of the questions that we received can be answered just by that guide.
Absolutely.
And I actually crossed off a lot on the list here, but so if I get into the application process or the certification process, and right off the bat, what should I study? Like, that's the easiest question. I know there's recommendations in the guide, but do you have any personal recommendations?
I recommend what is in the guide, honestly. I think those are the best recommendations. The other thing to remember is it's unlikely you're going to pass the test if you just read one book. Okay, our examinations and questions were prepared by practicing professionals who've been practicing for decades and represent things that you ought to know. And it is broad-based. So I have a certified photogrammetrist certification. I have a book on my shelf that I would recommend studying, which is this one right here, which is Elements of Photogrammetry and Applications in GIS. I would recommend that, but that would basically cover most of the content on the photogrammetric specific examination questions. And if you look at the breakdown, half the test is not going to be on photogrammetry at the scientist level. So there are lots of things to know. I know that we only require 6 years of experience as a minimum to qualify for our exam. It's been my experience that if you only have 6 years experience, it's a very difficult exam. On the flip side, I have a person that I work with at my company who's been doing photogrammetry for almost 30 years, and he didn't have his CP, and we asked him to go take the test, and he said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm not going to study. I'm just going to go take the test. I'll take the test because you told me I have to take the test. And he passed the test the first time. So do you have to study a book to pass the test? This gentleman was able to pass the test based upon his 30 years in the industry. So everybody's a little different. I do think personally having a degree in surveying and mapping, which now those degrees are called geomatics, and the fact that I had multiple courses in photogrammetry and GIS and remote sensing, I do think that classical education goes a long way to help you pass the exam. It's not required, but it would probably mean you got to do a lot of self-study if not. So does that kind of answer what you need to study? Although I didn't really answer it.
For sure. I think about having the background education in surveying and mapping is a key point. I know when I was writing the exams, I was studying for the Canadian board exams, and I mean it just crossed right over into the certification exams. Are there any classes or education offered by ASPRS to help you succeed in the examinations?
We do at our conference. We always have multiple technical tracks for different categories. There's LiDAR courses, there's photogrammetry courses that we typically offer. At the main conference, we do have what we call some GeoBytes seminar. If you're a member of ASPRS, you get access to our little short courses and short seminars on subject matter areas. Those can be very valuable. But we are not an education organization. We are primarily a credentialing organization and a volunteer society that helps spread knowledge. I think the best comparison is if anyone is familiar with NCWF, which the National Council for Examinations of Engineers and Surveyors. If you're going to get your engineering or surveying license, you have to take the NCWF professional engineering exam, or the fundamentals of engineering exam, or fundamentals of surveying, or professional or principles and practice of surveying exam. And they offer all of those, but they don't offer courses to pass the test. Basically, that's looked at as a conflict of interest, because you're either objectively credentialing someone on something they should know, or you're an education provider, is the way the industry typically looks at those things. And we are primarily an objective credential provider versus the people that teach you how to pass our exam.
And I think the workshops offered by ASPRS are a good resource if somebody's looking for classes or education offered by ASPRS.
Yep, and you should be able to find that on our website. Again, that conflict of interest thing, I have seen and graded all of the exam questions on the exam, so I am precluded from teaching a course. The people that teach the course aren't allowed to be the same people that make the questions, because they consider that a conflict of interest. Because teaching you how to pass the test is not ensuring you have a broad base of knowledge to pass the test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
That's that catch-22 thing.
In that preparation phase, again, the examinations are broad-based, as you mentioned. What if I identify a knowledge gap in an area? What's the best way to address that?
Self-study. If there could be a course that we offer that could help you, I can't guarantee that. We do have that breakout of topic areas. If you think you have a gap, I would advise self-study. We had a gentleman about 3 years ago who took the CP exam 3 times, and I gave him a call and I said, look, I'm looking at your scores. I don't think you're going to pass this exam without doing something different. That gentleman actually enrolled in a college level photogrammetry class, and he took a remote course, online learning. He took a 3-hour class on photogrammetry. He came back and passed the test, because he did well on just about everything, but some of the very core principles of photogrammetry was where he was missing, and it was clear he just needed some, what I call classical education in that area.
So based on what you've seen, what are common pitfalls that candidates run into in the process?
The biggest pitfall is not getting their references in. We got 2 emails last week from 2 different people saying, hey, it's been 2 months, I haven't heard back. And I think one of them, Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, said, I looked on the online portal and it looks like somebody didn't turn in the reference. Is that what was holding up my application going to committee? And we're like, yes, that's exactly what it is. We'll send it out to that person again. And I think Danielle mentioned to that person, you might want to call that guy or girl and remind them to turn in your reference, because we do need a fully complete package before it gets sent to committee. Did you want to add something, Danielle?
I was going to say, yeah, I'll just chime in on that. I usually like to recommend that, again, when I start processing, the application and you get your invoice from me saying, as soon as you pay, we're going to contact your references, that you just reach out to those 4 individuals that you've put on, that specific application, saying ASPRS has now gained my application. They will be reaching out to you. because there are some times that it does go to spam or it gets overlooked. We know that y'all are all extremely busy professionals in this industry. But that little nudge that you can give as the applicant to the reference, it usually helps get it back quicker. But definitely agree with Mike, that is usually the biggest thing that gets held up.
So of all the core areas of the exam, is there one that's the most challenging that people struggle with the most?
I think it's the photogrammetry exam. But I think photogrammetry is photogrammetry and remote sensing are both extremely complex scientific areas. I compare it to LiDAR and I go, okay, with LiDAR and photogrammetry, I may both have a moving platform, an airplane flying that's bouncing around and moving around. So I got GPS and an IMU on there, that's fine. But when it comes to the measurements and what you do, LiDAR is going to give you a single direct laser pulse measurement to give you a position. That's a fairly simple concept to explain. If we have to go into, hey, wait, I took 2 different pictures at 2 different locations, and I have to correlate those 2 together accurately so that I can see properly in stereo to derive an elevation, that is a much more complicated process. So I think the underlying core concepts of photogrammetry are one of the more difficult, it's probably our most difficult, it is our most difficult exam, just because of the core concepts involved in photogrammetry in general.
Okay, so I've just written one of the exams and I've flunked. Is there any support mechanisms or resources available to help those people who are failed their first time?
Well, if someone would like, I typically, depending on the score, a lot of people call me. We are absolutely willing, if you take the test and you have questions after the test, reach out. I can go through, I can access people's exams online, and I can give some additional feedback. I can't give you the answers, but I can give you some additional feedback, and I might be able to help guide someone on where they might want to focus future study. Another thing of interest, a complaint that we've gotten is people take the exam or they want to know what's on the exam. And because our exam bank is relatively small compared to an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor, we don't give out old exam questions. So the way we've compensated for that is basically allowing you to take the test twice. What I tell people is if you don't know what to study, you get to take it twice. Take the exam and then go study. I can't do much more for you than let you take the exam one time to see what it's like and what's on it. That to me is the best way of doing it. And don't feel bad if you don't pass it the first time.
Okay, I guess I'll switch gears a little bit. How is ASPRS adapting to changes in technology and industry trends in the geospatial sciences?
Are you talking ASPRS itself or the examination, or both?
Both, but this is a certification kind of focused podcast, so maybe in relation to the examinations, is the content changing?
It is. So right now we are currently going through a process where we're having volunteers who already have certifications going back and retaking exams and offering comments on examination questions. And we have a working group that is now working with academia and other professionals to help expand the examination bank, our question bank, to try and make sure we're asking relevant questions. Because technology does change, things do change. I know that I think there's a question on our UAS exam that actually needs to be updated because it still references one of the original Part 107 regulations at the time. So we do try to keep our exams up to date. It is a very labor-intensive process because we are an all-volunteer organization, but we are currently working on that now. We're supposed to do that approximately every 5 years. COVID put us behind by about 3 years because we weren't having in-person meetings. And in 2019, Teams and Zoom were not as ubiquitous and easy to use as they are now. If in 2019 you said, hey, let's do some exam writing and do it on this thing called Zoom, people would have looked at you like you're crazy. So we are utilizing things like this in technology, and we're trying to update the examination questions to be more relevant. As far as the organization, our standing committees, our divisions are always looking at the latest technology and trying to provide education and or content regarding that. If you come to a conference, you will see that.
And I think regarding some of the resources, I know the book you held up, Elements, is under, it's getting revised right now, and I can guess, and I can't confirm, but it'll probably have more UAS related stuff in there in the future, which was missing from that edition.
I would not be surprised.
So here's a question that I can answer, but you can add on to Mike. So are there any success stories or testimonials from certified individuals that you can share? And my answer to that is attend the ECPC weekly meetings on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. And also we have a bunch of recorded success stories that are available on YouTube. Do you have any other resources that you're aware of, Mike?
I don't, other than myself. I graduated college in 1993, and I went on the pure surveying side. And it wasn't until the mid 2000s, I'll call them 2003 and 4, that I started getting more heavily involved, because I'm in Florida and they regulated photogrammetry and they regulated LiDAR. And I found myself as a licensed surveyor being more and more pulled into this geospatial realm. And it took me to a position, a new job, and I needed to get my certification to fulfill the duties of that job. So I literally went back to my old college texts and started studying again, talked to my old professor Bondowit, who gave me some more study guides and advice on what to study and what they were doing in college at that time. And I went back and got my CP, and I haven't set a boundary quarter in about 15 years now. So there's a success story. I'm not the old school ground surveyor anymore that I was the first 15 years of my career.
Thanks for sharing that.
Looks like Tim has a question. I see.
Yeah.
Hey guys, Tim here. Can you guys hear me okay?
You're a little quiet.
Okay. How about now? Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. Hi Mike, Tim, also in Florida. Questions I had for you were, are the number of questions on each exam like the same? Like if I went for GIS, is it the same total number of questions versus like the LiDAR?
Yes. So the mapping scientist level exams are 100 questions each, and the technologist exams are 50 questions each.
You know, say I was going for the GIS mapping scientist, I see that there's a list of 9 recommended books. Would I need to get all 9 books for self-guided study, or based on the area that I'm going in, is there guidance, you know, saying of those 9 books, like these are the ones that would be most relevant to pick up for self-guided study?
We don't go into that detailed of a recommendation because it's really difficult. It depends on the candidate's personal experience and background. If you have a bachelor's degree in GIS, you might not need the same thing as if you had a bachelor's degree in surveying like I do. You may not need the same level of additional study. So it's really hard to advise as to what an individual which book would be better for them or not.
Well, like I'm thinking, like if I'm doing like the mapping scientist GIS, right? And I have a master's in GIS, I have 15 plus years in industry, you know, do I need to get, you know, the book on the intro to the UAV systems, right?
There is a chance that you will have some random poll questions on UAS, just like you would on potentially LiDAR or photogrammetry.
Mm-hmm.
So an intro book would not be a bad thing for each of the specialty areas for you to study. So, you know, an intro book on UAS, on GIS, on LiDAR, those things are all good to have. If you don't want to take the expense and the time to study, my best advice, as I said, was take the exam one time, see what you think. It's the best thing I can give you as far as the background on it.
Great. And then my last question was for the costs associated with it. There was the application procedures and costs. The $300 for the scientist level exam, that's just for the exam, right? So there'll be a fee for the application, but then it's $300 for the exam. Do I have that right?
No, the $300 is an application fee, and that is the full, if you are a member of ASPRS, that would be the full price you would pay. That covers committee reviews, all the pieces of it. So there's a one-time fee at the application stage.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Looks like Chris has it signed up.
Hey, Mike. Thank you. Chris Brand. I'm out of Arizona. Are you guys able to hear me?
I can hear you.
When reviewing an application, how much emphasis is placed on higher education? For example, I was hired out of college prior to finishing my degree, but I've been in the industry for about 4 years now. Does the lack of a degree basically mean like a no-go for the application?
What we typically tell people is to, how do I put this? What we typically tell people on the application is we want you to make sure that you provide us with the most in-depth and detailed information regarding your experience and education that you can provide us. If, let's say, it's a PDF form, if you feel like there's not enough space there, you could also send in with your application a Word doc or a PDF with a narrative of your experience to explain why you think you have the level of experience that we think we're looking for. So do you have to have a bachelor's degree in something to be a scientist level certification? No. But if you don't have some higher education in the field, we're looking to have you provide us with something that would augment that, some sort of information. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you, buddy.
Okay. And we have had people before who have applied for scientists and got recommended for technologists, and they thought they should have something different. If that happens, if you call ASPRS, we can go over your application and talk you through and give you some advice.
Thank you.
I think that's all the questions. Greg, I have a hard stop at 2. Do you have do you have one final question for me, maybe?
Are you okay with us sharing this recording on social media?
Absolutely.
If anybody wants any more information, call Mike on LinkedIn. Yeah, message him on LinkedIn.
Yes, give me a shout. Applications@asprs.org or certification@asprs.org are also ways to get in touch with myself and Danielle.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time, Mike. We should probably stay on the line. Maybe we could end the recording and see if there's any more questions in the audience, and we'll send them your way.
Absolutely, yes. Send me any questions that come up, and I'll be happy to answer them either individually or in mass.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mike and Danielle. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.